Hi, my name is Will from Didgeridoo.com, and I'm creating this video to kind of give an overview. There's no script to this. I'm just going to kind of spill my brain on the subject of the design of multi-drone instruments and how they're built in comparison to, say, a traditional didgeridoo. So some of you might be watching this on directly on YouTube or on another website, but this video is also made to go along with the text that's on my website regarding the multi-drone, and this is kind of just a video version to help understand the text better and vice versa. So if you're watching it on YouTube or another website, it might help to go back to wetdidgeridoo.com and look at the text that goes along with this, and it might make a lot more sense. The multi-drone instruments are tuned to a specific interval, meaning, say the drone note is in the key of D, the first trumpet note might be tuned to a key of B. So it's going to sit at a specific interval that might work with Western music, or if not, just in general, the multi-drone instruments are going to bring that first trumpet a lot closer to the drone note than it normally would be. So to illustrate this, I have an instrument here made by Djalu Gurruwiwi, and the first trumpet on this, and this is also pretty common in the world of modern and traditional instruments, to have the first trumpet sit an octave plus one whole step away from the drone. So what that looks like is, well, to play it. So this instrument isn't tuned perfectly, but the drone is roughly in the key of D, and the first trumpet's roughly in the key of E. Alright, so if D is our drone note, this is our drone note, the first trumpet on that Djalu instrument sits an octave plus one whole step away at E. So, just really quick. So a lot of contemporary instruments and traditional instruments are tuned to this interval. Some people don't like a direct octave because it's not as much variety. For solo playing, you get a little bit more of a distinction between the two if it's actually like dissonant, if it actually doesn't sound as good together. So like those two can, if it's an octave jump, it can get muddied together. But that's all personal preference. Anyway, so that's most traditional instruments and contemporary didgeridoos that aren't built for this technique have a first trumpet that is more than an octave away from the drone. So here's a drone, here's an octave, and usually the trumpet note sits higher than this interval on most didgeridoos. Now if you have a really straight instrument, the interval between the drone and the first trumpet's usually going to be a lot bigger. So if you have like a straight PVC pipe, it's usually going to be pretty hard to play that first trumpet because that straight pipe puts the first trumpet really high. Like that might be your first trumpet on a completely straight D. So by opening up the bell and making a conical instrument, it's going to start to lower that trumpet down. So most didgeridoos with flares will have that transition. Like this Djalu instrument has a overall taper. It's brought that first trumpet down to be an octave plus one. So for the multi-drone instruments, what is done is a huge bell section is added, or a long, not big bell section, but a long bell section is added. And when a long bell section is added, it brings that first trumpet down closer to the drone. So the longer the bell section, the lower the first trumpet is to the drone. What that might look like is anything below, this is an octave jump, so say this would be like the typical didge key, and then this represents the first trumpet. So that's an octave. The multi-drone range is inside of here. So if I can push the first trumpet note to get below this point, so if it's the transition like, that's going to be the multi-drone range. And so what that does is, if you read more on the website about the drop octave technique, or you're already familiar, the drop octave technique allows you to play an octave below the normal drone. So what the multidrone opens up is when you bring this anywhere below the normal octave jump, it opens up a distinct note, whatever this trumpet comes out to. So for example, this instrument here is in the key of D with the first trumpet B. So it's less than an octave away. And what this makes available is, like the drop octave, which is going to be here, it's going to give you a drop octave for this trumpet. So the trumpets, when they're more than an octave away, you can't really hit another drone note for those trumpets, essentially dropping those an octave. But when they're less than an octave away, you can play a drop octave of the first trumpet, as long as you get that compression of having that proximity between the drone and the first trumpet. So because we have this interval, we can have a B down here. We can play this also. So we have this in the drone range, and then that's the first trumpet. So what I have here are three instruments that are tuned to different intervals. What they all have in common is that the first trumpet on each one is in the key of B. So this is an F, which is a higher key. This is the E flat, and this one's in the key of D. So you'll notice that the first trumpet will be the same on each one. But the drones will be different. So I'm showing this to just kind of display the range of the multi-drone instruments and to show the difference between the compression of when you push a trumpet down on a higher instrument really far and when you push it less, not as far on a lower instrument. What I mean by that is this is an F with the same pitch first trumpet as this D. And this instrument is a lot higher in key, meaning in comparison, the first trumpet on this instrument is a lot closer to this instrument's drone than this one. What that does is makes the multi-drone range more malleable. So like there's that drop octave below the first trumpet. There's that transition, and then the lowest. What it makes possible is on these instruments where it's a really far extension, it makes you able to force other notes that aren't going to sound really clear. Like you won't really be able to get the harmonic out on them, but if you use them inside of a rhythm, it's going to be more malleable. So you'll be able to essentially create more notes when there's that big of a compression of the, shortening of the intervals. So as you can see, there's a couple extra notes in there that weren't in relation to that drop of the first trumpet. Now that's going to be harder to do on an instrument with less compression, and that's going to go all the way up into a normal didge. When it's over an octave away, it's going to be even harder. So if you have like for example a D with a C first trumpet, that's going to be one whole step less than an octave. That's going to be a multi-drone, but it's going to behave more like what people call a drop jaw, which is why a drop jaw is kind of a common technique, I feel, because there's a lot of those instruments out there where it's just one below because people have really big bells. It makes you can do the drop jaw without this even there. You can just do it with your lips, but this makes it really prominent. So as you get up into that farther away, it's going to make it harder to make the notes malleable. So now to give you a perspective across the range, all of these are also going to have that same, in the drone range, B. So there's a B trumpet on all of these instruments, and the drone's different, but below the drone, there's going to be that distinct B. So this kind of gives you an idea of the range. And then overall, the benefit of having these higher keys, of course, the lower keys are a lot more popular, I feel, because it's a lot easier to swim around in them slow and fast and make them sound like hypnotizing to yourself, like that low frequency. And you hear less people playing high notes, I feel, because it's more of like a high frequency that's harder to control. But the awesome thing when you get into the multi-drone range with a huge compression like this, where the trumpet's really close, is it makes a lot more notes possible, and it makes a fast transition between all these notes achievable. So just to give you an idea, I'll just mess around on each one to show kind of the dynamics of each one. So this one's going to want to be played a little bit more controlled because it's so low. That drop octave is going to be in need of maybe slower to make it sound fat. Okay, so to continue on, now we have a new set of didges, and these are all multi-drone didges that have something else in common. This time, all the drones are the same key. These are all in the key of D, and the first trumpet is different on each one. So they're all tuned to a different interval. This one's D with the first trumpet of A. Sounds like this. This one is not tuned in the trumpet range. The drone is tuned to D, but the first trumpet sits less than an octave away in between C and D. So this was built more to be like a solo instrument that's louder, with a bigger bell. And this one's D and then C. So somewhere between C and B. And then this one is D and, what is it? D and B flat. And last one, we have the same one from earlier. This is D and B. Okay, so to demonstrate the difference between all these, I'll show you the same drone first all the way across. So now I'll show you in order from lowest first trumpet to highest first trumpet, which will go, this one's the lowest first trumpet, A sharp or B flat, B, and then somewhere in between B and C. So starting with this, lowest transition. The next. finally. So this gives you an idea of just some of the different varieties of instruments. When you see in the descriptions of my didgeridoos, the tuning is listed. If it's a multi-drone instrument, you can assume that the first trumpet tune is going to be less than an octave away. If it's a drop octave, that means it's going to be higher than an octave away. Okay, so now let's look at what makes the trumpets the way they are. So this instrument has the lowest trumpet in comparison to the D. And as you'll notice, it's got the longest bell. So I would consider this to here, from here to here, the bell section. And you notice that the bell comes out and then it goes straight. So this would help understand for anybody who wants to try to build these instruments out of PVC or whatever material, the concept of what makes it, how it plays. So longest bell has the lowest trumpet. Now this one, it's just as long as the rest of the instruments, but it's got a flare in its bell. And its bell is pretty long too. You'd almost, well, it's probably still the shortest, but you'd think it would have a low trumpet because the bell is so big, but because of the flare, you actually lose the effect of when you come out straight from the open part, it'll keep lowering and lowering and lowering as long as you keep coming out straight. But as you go conical, it's actually going to start lowering the higher trumpets down. So the higher trumpets are probably more compressed on this instrument and less compressed on these, because these, the transition is just here and then it's straight. This has a gradual transition all the way. So less of a compression of the first trumpet, but more of a compression of the trumpets after that. This one next is just a half step higher in trumpet note than this one. And you'll notice it's a really similar shape, really similar length almost, but a little shorter. And then finally this one, this is actually a cool design because it's a really tight bore and a really small bell section in diameter. So even though it's still got plenty of volume, and you can actually, it's almost the contrast. So these three have a bigger bore. It's about an inch, the bore, or maybe a little less than an inch. And this one's got a tighter bore. It's about 7/8 of an inch. And so that transition is the thing that makes it. So saying that these have bigger bell ends, but they also have bigger bores. That's why they're similar in length. This one has a tighter, but it's still got a tighter overall bell section. So I hope that gives you an understanding of how the shapes affect the different trumpets and overtones. All right, so now let's look at the what makes the multidrone, as I'll call it, how it sounds on these lower instruments. So what I call a multidrone is the drop octave of the first trumpet, that extra drone note that we get that's in between the normal drone and the drop octave. So on higher instruments, it sounds more like a forced note. It's more wild, and the more you play the technique, the more you'll be able to control it and actually play harmonics on it. On these lower instruments, it behaves more like a normal drone. So you'll be able to play harmonics on. You can always play the harmonics like clearly on a drop octave, but the questionable note is being able to play those harmonics on that middle note, which is the multidrone. So on these lower instruments, it makes it easier, essentially. So this is an A drone that I'll be playing, which would be like a normal low A in the normal Didge keys, but this is lower than the D. So D, A. Now I'll go from the lowest to highest, drop octave, multi-drone, normal drone, and play the harmonics on each one and show you the harmonics. You'll notice that I'm actually bounce breathing on the multi-drone, which is something when I first figured this technique out, I had a lot of trouble with. Since my lips have been getting stronger, the more I play, the more I can make the multi-drone, just like when you're learning the drop octave, the more you do it, just like learning the drone in general when you first learn Didge, the more you play it, the clearer it's going to get, the more control you have over it. So now I've gotten to the point where I can actually circular breathe on the middle note, and that's just practicing, you know, your lip strength and practicing inside of the multi-drone range. So just a little more of an example. So let's look at a couple different ones. This one, because this has the highest, it's still a multi-drone, but it's right at the edge where it wouldn't be, because it's a D with a C, which is only one whole step below the octave limit. So this one's gonna have that multi-drone note's gonna be a little bit more wild. So drop octave, the multi-drone, and lastly the normal drone. So you hear that it was a little bit more wild sounding than this one. A little more unstable, and it's hard to go in between these digits, but when you focus and practice on one specific instrument and really learn that instrument, you can start to control these notes in a really normal way, like any other normal drone or drop octave. So I hope that gives you a good sense of what these instruments are capable of, and also for those who want to try to build their own, a better understanding of how they work and how you can shape your instruments to make them play in this way. Talking about extending the bells to lower the first trumpet, in my quest for finding these intervals, it takes forever to constantly cut the bells, add to the mouthpiece, cut from the mouthpiece to find these tunings. So you'll notice that these extensions, a lot of didgeridoo crafters use these extensions for different reasons. Some of them, it just looks good. Others, if you're using a softer wood, you can put a harder wood on top of it. If you're using a raw oiled mouthpiece, it'll be a nicer mouthpiece. So all those things help. And then people use them to tune, of course, to get that depth. I find myself cutting up and down and adding and subtracting to find that perfect balance, because sometimes you'll add to the bell and it'll lower it too much. Sometimes you'll add to the top, it'll lower the drone too much. So essentially, adding to the neck lowers the drone note, but doesn't lower the trumpet note as much. Adding to the bell end lowers the first trumpet note, but doesn't lower the drone note as much. So that's kind of the balance, and it's a crazy mission it drives me crazy sometimes to try to find this tuning, but for my purposes at least, the benefits far outweigh the time cost of going that route of tuning, so I can play with Western music in a way that I couldn't otherwise.